Welcome to footballgameplan.com, where football makes sense. I'm Memory Hunt, the czar of the playbook, bringing you a football game plan special presentation. We're taking a look at Football Game Plan's Elite 85. What I'm holding in my hand here is the National Letter of Intent, and we're compiling a team of 85 of the greatest players in college football history, and we're going to offer them scholarships. So let's take a look at the quarterbacks that have made our list as part of the Elite 85. When you talk about quarterback play on a pure leadership level, you can go no further than Tommy Frazier. He is everything that you want in a quarterback. When you look at a guy that led that Nebraska football team from '92 to 1995 and to win those national championships, Tommy Frazier by far is the starting quarterback on this team, and by far one of the best quarterbacks I've ever seen in college football history.
Now let's take a look at some other quarterbacks that were awarded scholarships on my Elite 85 team. You look at Sammy Ball, the godfather of the forward pass, two-time All-American at TCU, and finished his career with 39 career touchdown passes. And you can't knock Tim Tebow for the success he had as a Gator, 07 Heisman Trophy winner, three-time All-American, and finished his career as the SEC all-time rushing leader with 57 touchdowns. But Charlie Ward had everything that you look for at the quarterback position. This guy was a tremendous leader, was accurate, and also mobile. If I can compare his skill set to a guy that's playing today, it would be Russell Wilson. Charlie Ward definitely earns a spot on my Elite 85.
Herschel Walker is probably the only guy that could have legitimately made the jump from high school to the NFL. You talk about a guy that was 6'1", 230 pounds, had sprinter speed, and led that Georgia team as a true freshman to the national title in 1980.
Red Grange was the first superstar in football. What he was able to do at Illinois was legendary. Barry Sanders, what he was able to do in that 1 year in 1988 was epic. 2,800 yards rushing, 42 rushing touchdowns. That's incredible. But when you look at Archie Griffin, you look at a guy that I can compare to maybe Charlie Garner. Scat back, but a guy that always gained yards, had underrated power and quickness. Definitely one of the best running backs of all time.
When you look at Earl Campbell and the way he ran the football, you talk about a guy that was a big guy, 5'10", 230 pounds, no wasted movement, so he's always making moves downhill. And I had to find a way to put him on this roster, so that's why I have him listed as my fullback. But the Tyler Rose was one of the best running backs in college football history.
I wanted to put these tailbacks underneath the fullback category because of their versatility. You look at Ironhead Hayward, 1987 All-American, 1,700 yards in 87. And you look at Marcus Allen, we know how he started out as a fullback, was the first 2,000 rusher in NCAA history. But Ron Dane at 5'10", 250 pounds. Can you imagine an 18-year-old cornerback or safety being the last line of defense with the big Dane coming down the hole? There's no way he's getting tackled by a corner or a safety. Dane definitely earned a spot on this list.
I enjoyed watching Desmond Howard play, and you could tell he was a guy that enjoyed playing the game of football. Always had a smile on his face, doing what receivers don't do nowadays, diving for footballs, and it was always showing up in clutch moments when Michigan needed it the most. Desmond Howard is one of the best players in college football history.
In order to be a receiver on this list, you have to be able to take over games and dominate, and that's what Randy Moss and Anthony Carter did to the T. Moss did it in 2 years at Marshall, 54 career touchdowns. Anthony Carter was a three-time All-American and kept showing up at the biggest moments of the game. But Rocket Ishmael was one of the fastest guys I've ever seen in football equipment. Literally ran a 4.25 in pads, and you can use him as a receiver, also line up in the backfield. He was one of the more versatile players in college football history.
Nowadays, when you look at tight ends, you almost look at these guys as if they're basketball players. And some guys have played basketball, but you look at them and you like them for their sheer athleticism. That's what you have to like about Keith Jackson and what he was able to do at Oklahoma. He was the first dynamic player out that position. A big guy, 6'2", 225, that had speed like a wide receiver, made him a matchup nightmare in a Big 8 conference.
People think the tight end position has evolved into this newfound position, but it's always been dominant. When you look at Ozzie Newsome, who was a receiver in college, a big wide receiver, 20 yards per catch for his career, and Mike Ditka, those guys really dominated and forced guys to account for the tight end. And Pete Mitchell, quite honestly, played that role very well for Boston College. Maybe not the flashiest guy at the next level, but while he was in college, no one epitomized what the tight end position was supposed to play like other than Pete Mitchell.
Orlando Pace is the standard for what an offensive tackle should be judged and graded by. You look at a guy that had the footwork of a left tackle, had the power of an interior offensive lineman, and the tenacity of a defensive player. Give me Orlando Pace any day out of the week.
Now here are some of the other bookends that made my Elite 85 roster. Bill Frelick finished 6th in the Heisman Trophy voting in 1985, and Bob Gain was one of the best players of his era, a 2-time All-American out of Kentucky. But when you look at Tony Boselli, from 91 to 94, protected the blind side of USC quarterbacks, and no one did it better. This guy was one of the best tackles I've ever seen.
Jim Parker is what you would call your ideal guard. You look at a guy that was big, he was physical, and he could move. Was a 2-time All-American at Ohio State, and is clearly one of the best guards to ever play college football.
Now here's some of my interior offensive linemen on my Elite 85. Dean Steinkuhler from Nebraska, 2-time All-American, Outland Trophy, and Lombardi Award winner in 1983, and John Hanna led one of the best offensive lines in the country. But when you look at Aaron Taylor, I know you can go with any Nebraska offensive lineman, but this guy was one of the best. You were able to run the football down the middle, and that was key in that Nebraska option attack in the mid-90s.
Anytime you have an award named after you, that means you have done exceptionally well and left an impact during your college career. And Dave Remington, a 2-time All-American at Nebraska, set the mold for what centers are supposed to look like.
Mel Hein was not only one of the best players in NFL history, made it to the Hall of Fame, but also one of the best college football players in history, had his number 7 jersey retired at Washington State. And Alex Woseckiewicz out of Fordham played with Vince Lombardi and was one of the stalwarts on that offensive line. But Bear Bryant called Dwight Stevenson one of the best players he's ever coached regardless of position. This guy was 6'2", 255, an undersized center, but dominated not only at Alabama, but also the Miami Dolphins.
When you mention the term living in the backfield, you're talking about a defensive player that is always a nuisance on the opposite side of the line of scrimmage, and that perfectly describes Hugh Green out of Pitt. This guy was a terror coming off the edge in the 70s.
Bruce Smith was known as Mr. Sackman on Virginia Tech's campus, 46 career sacks, 22 in 1984, and Ross Browner, this was a guy that walked away as one of the best defensive linemen in Notre Dame's history. When you talk about athleticism at the defensive end position, you think of guys like Julius Peppers. But when you look back, Bubba Smith was that guy for Michigan State in the 1960s, a tremendous pass rusher that but also had the power to hold his own and be effective as a run defender.
Leroy Selman was an outstanding collegiate player, and that's why he's on this list as the starter at defensive tackle. You look at what he was able to do, being able to play the run and also get pressure on the quarterback. When you're able to do both, it makes you unstoppable, and it also earns you a spot on my list.
There's a lot of speed and athleticism coming out of the interior defensive line on this list. Randy White, 2-time All-American, Outland and Lombardi Trophy winner, and Buck Buchanan played for the great Eddie Robinson at Grambling, one of the best pass rushers coming out of college. And Rich Glover was one of the more underrated superstars coming out of those Nebraska football teams. You talk about an undersized defensive tackle that caused a lot of disruption. Also was an Outland Trophy winner, one of the greats of all time.
Tommy Nobis is what a linebacker is supposed to play like at the collegiate level. This guy averaged over 20 tackles a game and started on both offense and defense. So he was one of the last guys, one of the true guys to play on both sides of the ball. And it's great that he's already in the Collegiate Football Hall of Fame. He should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but that's another story for another video.
You can't begin to describe a linebacker without naming one of these guys' names. Dick Butkus was a two-time All-American at Illinois, also played center. Mike Singletary was an outstanding defensive player, two-time All-Southwest Conference Player of the Year. But Chuck Bednarik was one of the last of a dying breed. The 60-minute man playing both offense and defense, was an outstanding linebacker for the Penn Quakers from 1945 to 1948. Concrete Charlie was his nickname while he tore up the Ivy League.
I think Deion Sanders ruined the cornerback position, if you ask me. You look at a guy that dominated his opponent week in, week out on the top receiver, caught interceptions, brought those back to the house for touchdowns, also helped out in the return game, making plays for touchdowns on punt return and kickoff return, and also had the ball skills of a wide receiver. Now you have all these college coaches out there and pro scouts going look for the next Deion Sanders, and it's 2013 and we're still trying to find the next primetime.
Quietly, Al Broski out of Illinois is still the all-time leader in career interceptions with 29. That definitely earns you a spot. And when you're the first defensive player to win the Heisman Trophy, Charles Woodson, two-time All-American, you definitely earn a spot on the Elite 85. But Jim Thorpe wasn't only just a great cornerback, also was a great offensive player and one of the best athletes, regardless of sport, of all time.
I think Kenny Easley was the best safety in college football history, if you ask me. You look at a guy that was a three-time All-American at UCLA, four-time All-Pac-10 performer, and also you look at him being drafted by the Chicago Bulls in the 1981 NBA draft. That's athleticism. You talk about a guy that can hit like a linebacker and cover like a cornerback. This was one of the most impressive safeties I've ever seen.
There's some great safeties to make my Elite 85, and when you look at Jack Tatum, he made sure you did not want to go across the middle of the field. Was a former running back, but made the transition smoothly when he got to Ohio State. And Ronnie Lott showed that versatility, which made him one of the best players of all time. Was a cornerback that also moonlighted as safety, another knockout artist. But when you look at Tommy Casanova out of LSU, this guy is LSU's only three-time All-American, a guy that played offense and defense and was also an outstanding return man. Now here are the guys that round out my Elite 85 roster. You look at some of these great players in college football history. Corey Moore out of Virginia Tech, one of the undersized defensive ends that consistently got pressure on the quarterback. Reggie Bush, I have him on my roster as a kickoff and punt returner. And you look at Mark May, one of the best linemen in college football history. Terry Kennard, one of the best safeties. Got to get another tight end in Tony Gonzalez on the roster. Another kickoff and punt returner guy in Johnny Rogers out of Nebraska, a.k.a. the Jet. This guy was one of the fastest players to ever play college football. Two linebackers, LeVar Arrington and Dat Nguyen, two of my favorites. And yes, we do have a kicker and punter on this list. Kevin Butler out of Georgia and Ray Guy, one of the best ever out of Southern Miss.